We're always looking for those bits of knowledge, right? Things that can genuinely shift how we live, maybe even add some healthy years.
Absolutely.
Well, today we've got a really interesting one. We're doing a deep dive into a nutrient that's making some waves, definitely creating some buzz around well-being and longevity.
That's right. We're focusing today on C15.0. Pentadecanoic acid is the technical term.
Right.
And our mission really is to unpack what this saturated fatty acid is all about. We want to explore its potential. Could it help us live healthier, maybe longer lives? We're drawing insights from a pretty thought-provoking article in the New York Post.
And get the whole story kind of kicks off with U.S. Navy bottlenose dolphins.
Yeah, it's unexpected.
Seriously, who'd think dolphins would hold clues for, like, human aging? Okay, so let's start there. This dolphin connection, how did that even happen?
Well, it's fascinating. It centers around a veterinary epidemiologist, Stephanie Venn-Watson. She was working with these Navy dolphins, and she basically stumbled onto this link. She saw that dolphins with higher levels of C15.0, well, they were just healthier overall.
Healthier how, though? Like, what did she actually observe?
Well, the article mentions that when they gave these dolphins fish that were richer in C15.0, they actually saw improvements in their metabolic markers. Things like insulin, glucose, cholesterol levels, they decreased.
Wow, okay. That's pretty significant, especially in dolphins. It makes you wonder about us then.
Exactly. Those initial findings were the start, really. It led to more research looking at C15.0 for humans, and the article points to studies suggesting it might help lower the risk for some major chronic stuff.
Like what kind of stuff?
Things like fatty liver disease, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. There's even some, early suggestion it might help reverse some conditions, though that needs more research, obviously.
Okay, beyond those big ones, diabetes, heart disease, does it mention anything else? Any other potential perks?
Yeah, it does. The piece brings up things like potentially better sleep, maybe a boost in energy levels, and even some support for joint health. And it makes this comparison, which is pretty bold, to anti-aging drugs like rapamycin and metformin. That sort of frames the potential impact they think it might have.
Right. Comparing it to metformin and rapamycin definitely gets your attention. So, okay, how does it actually do all this?
Oh.
What's the mechanism behind this fatty acid?
Well, the article explains it's considered an essential fatty acid, so a bit like omega-3s in that sense.
Meaning we don't make enough ourselves.
Exactly. Our bodies don't produce sufficient amounts, so we need to get it from, outside sources, diet, potentially supplements.
We hear so much about omega-3s, inflammation, heart, brain. What makes C15.0 different? Or potentially, as the article hints, maybe even broader in its benefits.
Yeah, it seems to act on some fundamental cellular processes. One key thing is it activates AMPK.
AMPK, remind me what that does again.
So think of AMPK as like the master energy sensor or regulator in your cells. Activating it tells cells to take up glucose, burn fat for fuel, reduce inflammation.
Yeah.
Basically, crucial stuff that tends to slow down as we get older.
Ah, okay. So it's like giving ourselves an energy tune-up.
Yeah.
That makes sense in a longevity context. What else?
It also inhibits something called MTOR.
Yeah, BEOR, right. That comes up a lot in aging research, too.
Yeah, it's a pathway involved in cell growth. Too much MTOR activity later in life is linked to these senescent cells.
The zombie cells?
Exactly, those zombie cells. They hang around, don't work properly, and spew out inflammatory stuff. So inhibiting MTOR can help clear those out.
Okay.
And there's more. It apparently activates certain receptors, too. Receptors involved in regulating immunity, metabolism, mood, sleep, even appetite. So it seems to have quite a broad reach.
Okay, so it's doing quite a bit at the cellular level. If we want to get more of this naturally through food, where should we be looking? What's the lowdown?
Right. The article says the main sources are whole-fat dairy products, milk, butter, sour cream, certain cheeses. It even gives a specific number, like 1 tablespoon of butter might have around 75 milligrams of C15.0.
75 milligrams in a tablespoon of butter. Okay. Any other sources?
Yeah, high oleic sunflower oil is mentioned, and smaller amounts are apparently in meat, some seafood, and seeds too. But whole-fat dairy seems to be the main dietary hitter, according to this piece.
Interesting. So maybe avoiding all whole-fat dairy isn't the best move for everyone. What kind of daily amount are we talking about here? What does the article suggest as a target?
The suggested intake mentioned is somewhere between 100 and 200 milligrams per day.
100 to 200 milligrams. Okay. Now, getting that consistently from diet alone might be, well, a bit tricky for some people, or maybe they just don't consume much dairy. The article mentioned a supplement, right? Fatty 15?
Yes, exactly. Fatty 15, it was developed by Stephanie Venn-Watson, the epidemiologist from the Dolphin research, and her husband, Eric, who's a Navy physician. They launched it in 2021 through their company, Serafina Therapeutics.
And how much C15.0 is in it?
Each capsule has 100 milligrams. The article also mentions the cost for a starter kit.
Right.
And interestingly, they're also apparently working on fortifying foods with C15.0,
Yeah.
which, could make it much more accessible down the line if that pans out.
That's smart. So this Venn Watson, she also talks about something called cellular fragility syndrome. What's
Right.
that about? How does C15.0 tie in?
Yeah, that's a concept she's put forward. She links it to having low levels of C15.0. The idea is basically that without enough of this fatty acid, our cell membranes become weaker, less resilient over time, more fragile.
Okay. And that fragility leads to?
Well, it makes the cells more vulnerable to stress, and that vulnerability, she argues, can contribute to the development of things like type 2 diabetes, think insulin resistance, or fatty liver disease, or heart disease. The article suggests this could be a pretty widespread issue if her theory holds.
Cellular fragility. That's a worrying idea. So, okay, if someone starts taking this fatty 15 supplement or maybe ups their butter intake, how soon might they, feel something? Any time frame mentioned?
The article does give some numbers on that. It says about half the people using Fatty 15 reported noticing some benefits, could be sleep, energy, whatever, within about 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
And a larger group, around 72%, apparently noticed effects within 16 weeks, so about 4 months. But obviously, individual results will vary.
Sure, always. And what about safety? That's always a big question with supplements, since they aren't regulated like drugs. What did the article say?
It quotes Venn-Watson saying they've done numerous safety studies and 2 controlled clinical trials and found no negative side effects.
That sounds reassuring.
It does. But, it's still important to remember the context. Dietary supplements just don't go through the same kind of exhaustive multi-phase testing that prescription drugs do before hitting the market. So no negative side effects found so far is maybe the cautious way to put it.
Right, good point. Okay, let's circle back to that comparison with rapamycin and metformin. That seems like a key point in the article. It suggested C15.0 really competes, doesn't it?
Yeah, that was quite striking. Venn-Watson highlighted a study looking specifically at cell repairing abilities, and apparently Fatty 15 came out ahead of both rapamycin and metformin in that particular study.
Ahead of them. Wow.
Yeah. Though she also noted they all share some common ground, like having anti-inflammatory, antioxidant, antifibrotic effects, even some anti-cancer and antimicrobial activity reported across the board.
But there was a big difference pointed out too, wasn't there? Something about side effects?
Exactly. That's crucial. The article really contrasted them there. It mentioned that rapamycin, for instance, can have serious side effects, serious enough that someone like Brian Johnson, who's very into longevity, decided to stop taking it.
Right.
Whereas C15.0 is described in the piece as an extraordinarily safe nutrient, something we naturally get in small amounts from birth through milk. So that potential difference in the safety profile is, well, pretty significant.
Absolutely. Okay, so wrapping this up, it really sounds like C15.0 is this newly highlighted nutrient, maybe an overlooked one, with some really intriguing potential for health and maybe even longevity.
Yeah, definitely gaining attention.
And it all started with dolphins, which is just a great story in itself. We know it's in certain foods, especially whole-fat dairy. And there's this supplement option, Fatty 15, for people looking to boost their levels.
Precisely. We've touched on the potential links to chronic diseases, energy, sleep, how it might work at a cellular level via AMPK and mTOR, and how it stacks up against molecules like rapamycin and metformin,
Right.
particularly regarding safety.
It really does give you a lot to chew on, this deep dive into C15.0.
Yeah.
Thinking about that comparison to established longevity drugs, but then remembering it's just a natural fatty acid found in, well, butter.
Mm.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might more research here change how we think about diet and long-term health?
It's a fascinating question.
What could uncovering more about C15.0 mean for your own health path? Maybe digging into some of that research or Stephanie Venn-Watson's book that the article mentions could be an interesting next step for anyone curious.